Hey, welcome to Talking Decon. Today we are talking with a retired homicide detective. That's Lieutenant Carl Watts. He's going to share some extraordinary homicide stories from his time in the St. Petersburg Police Department. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so how long were you working for the St. Pete Police Department?
Oh, I did 27 years with St. Pete PD.
Wow, that's awesome. How old were you when you first started?
Ooh, man, you would ask me. I was about 25 when I got on.
Wow,
yeah,
wow.
about 25.
So I'm sure you've seen all the changes in policing over the 27 years that you were in.
Yes, I have.
A ton, right?
A lot of changes in law enforcement over the course of 27 years of policing.
Wow, wow. So did you go to the police academy at that point in St. Pete, or were they farming you guys out to another area?
No, you know, when I went through, the county had one college that we all went to, which was St. Pete Junior College. They call it the Southeastern Public Safety Institute, but that's where we all did our training at.
Okay.
So every law enforcement agency in the county
gets certified there.
Yeah,
Okay, fantastic. And then when you got out of that, did you start off in patrol, I'm assuming?
Yes, and basically the process when, at least with St. Pete, when we came out, we did a post-academy as well. So we did a pre-academy before you actually went to the academy.
Yep.
And when you got out, you did a post-academy and then a field training program.
Okay.
That was three and a half months after that.
Okay. Do you remember by chance how long you were in patrol before you went to a different unit?
Probably about 3-4 years.
Okay.
In patrol before I went to a different unit. I went to community policing at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, they had community policing then too, huh?
Yeah,
okay.
It was really popular back then.
Wow.
Yeah, and then it kind of, everything comes full circle.
Sure.
So,
yeah, now it is now, again.
Yeah.
Awesome. So at what point in your career did you decide to go into homicide?
Wow, so homicide was always a goal of mine. It was an area in the department that I wanted to get to eventually. So after community policing, I had an opportunity to become a member of the detective bureau. And usually when you're brand new, they start you off in an area where you have a lot of cases and you try to get some experience. And burglary, property crimes is one of those areas. So initially I went to burglary.
Okay.
Kind of, honed in my interview skills, got a little bit better at that. And,
yeah.
And I was pretty good at what I did. And so then I had an opportunity to go to robbery.
Okay.
Which was the Crimes Against Persons division. And got even better at what I was doing with interviews and solving cases, and then finally had my opportunity with homicide.
Okay, so would you say that the homicide unit's like the cream of the crop? Is that where everybody tries to get? Well,
I mean, everybody has their niche, what they want to do.
Right.
But some people like, vice and narcotics. Some people do just love property crimes. But homicide, for some is the ultimate area to go to, and it just takes a lot of investigative work and some time and some patience.
So your experience with burglary, then robbery, then homicide, which division would you say had the highest solving rate?
In in property crime, you tend to have a quite a bit more cases that you are assigned. I mean, you can come in after solving 15 burglaries, and then the following week you come in and you have 20 more on your desk.
Wow.
All right, so just the sheer capacity of those, it just made it tougher to solve those. But the unique thing about property crimes, especially in burglary, you usually had 1 or 2 suspects that were involved in, the majority of your burglaries in your area.
Interesting.
So then when you get to robbery, you did have a high solvability rate there.
Okay.
Because usually you have people caught on video a lot of times. You have prints that come back, and usually people don't keep their crimes a secret, and so therefore you're able to really solve those if you really dig in and get out on the streets and do your interviews. And confidential informants are always big.
Yes, they are.
in those areas, because people tell, they talk,
right,
and that information gets back to you, and you're able to solve some cases. And obviously, homicides, you don't have as many cases, and there's really no reason for somebody to just admit that they committed a crime. So your interviews are a little bit tougher. But even after the fact, just to make sure that that case is solid for a presentation in court, you have to have everything, dot your I's, cross your T's, everything has to be solid.
Now, during your time, in law enforcement, what role has science played in solving a lot of these homicides. Has that been a great assistance to you guys?
Oh, yes. So, over the course of years, the advancements in science and, forensic technology and so forth has really helped us in solving cases. Before it might just be latent prints. But then with DNA and the advancements there, it really has helped us identify people. Before, when I first came on, fingerprints were just on a card.
Right.
Then later on, they started putting them in the computer, and then it was shared nationally.
APHIS.
So everything was easier to get a hit on somebody.
Right.
And then the same thing with DNA advancements as well.
Okay. Have you found, though, that there is so much DNA being put through the system with all different police departments that it takes a while? There's kind of a delay there in getting some results.
You can have in cases information overload, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because without that, you won't solve anything. So
Right.
it's good to have all of that information, coming to you. And there are some delays, but at the same time, there's priorities too.
Sure.
In certain cases, there's a priority in solving something that might get bumped to the front of the line as opposed to something that's a property crime.
Okay.
So crimes against persons are really going to be a priority for them to come back with some DNA evidence or prints or anything like that.
So it sounds to me like processing the crime scene is crucial.
Very crucial. And that's important from the first officer that shows up on scene. So patrol, they're going to be the first ones there.
Right.
And so they need to secure the evidence, secure the scene, make sure the scene's not contaminated in any kind of way. And then after that, then, detectives come and, then there's the walkthrough, depending on what that type of crime it is.
Sure.
And there's the walkthrough of everything. And then your crime scene techs take care of that processing for you based off of what you have there and what the needs are.
So does the detective that is investigating it dictate what type of evidence, if any, need to be looked through or gathered? Do they dictate that to the crime scene investigation people?
Well, that's good because it really is a team effort.
Okay.
All right. So the technicians, they are experienced at what they do. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they can help you out, the detective, on what you need to also look for. But at the same time, the detectives are very keen as far as the investigation, knowing kind of, hey, in previous cases, what they need to identify and so forth. So it's really a team effort. But as a detective, you do dictate, hey, I want this process, or me want that process. But at the same time, there's feedback from the technician as well, and something you may have missed.
Right.
And they say, hey, how about processing this? So it is a team effort.
It sounds like it could be overwhelming. If you're walking into a scene, maybe a living room with carpet and lots of furniture, I mean, are you literally dismantling and combing each piece of items that are in that room?
Yeah, you know what? You really are. And it really takes a thorough and detailed process, very time consuming as far as getting evidence at a scene.
Okay.
Because just the smallest thing sometimes that you're thinking like you wouldn't necessarily think about, but then when you get there, you think, hey, I may have missed that. And so you actually go back through it in your head as well. And so you really, that's why I said before, it's really a team effort with you and the crime scene technician talking about things that need to be processed. Blood splatter, hair fibers, maybe, pulling something that may have prints on it. It's really a very detailed and slow process, but it takes a good team effort, a lot of communication on both parts to make sure that you get as much as you can and hopefully everything that you can. So
do you have two bites of the apple? If you don't get it the first day and you think, man, we should have gone a little closer at, the armoire, can you go back for a second bite of that apple?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So the scene, you try to maintain that scene as long as you need to get everything processed. Obviously, when it's an indoor scene, you have more time as opposed to an outdoor scene, because if it's an outdoor scene, you can't control the weather.
Right.
All right. So it's an outdoor scene, you really have to, especially in Florida, you really have to try to get it that first time out.
Okay.
Because it could get washed away, it could get blown away, but you really have to do everything you can. And we keep people. We'll keep officers around the perimeter of the scene.
Right.
24 hours, however many days we need them.
Just to maintain the integrity of it.
To maintain the integrity of the scene.
Okay.
That's the exterior, outdoors, or whether it's inside. But when it's inside, you have time. You can go through, have the text process, but you know what? We're not done with it. We're going back the next day to do some more processing as well. So you do have time, and you can really look back and think, okay, did we get this? Did we get that?
Gotcha.
You know, and from A to Z, you
Yeah.
make sure that you got everything, because it's an indoor scene.
Sure.
Yeah.
In your experience on an indoor type homicide, is there an average amount of time it takes to process a typical scene? Are we talking a couple hours, several days? Like, what are we talking here?
It all depends on the nature of the investigation and what type of crime. If it's a homicide, obviously, you know, it's going to take a little bit more time.
Okay.
But also determines, you know, it depends on what kind of scene you have inside.
Okay.
You know, you might have a suspect that's already known. It could have been something that's just occurred and is fresh. And, you know, it could have been just a domestic violence incident. It's, you know, husband and wife just occurred. Spouse is deceased. The other spouse may have even called it in.
Right.
That scene might be pretty clean. You might not have a lot to pull and process from there, as opposed to something where you don't know who did it. So that makes a big, that's a big, you know, part of, you know, your investigation, trying to see how much time it takes. So it's to say, is there an average? I can't really say that there's an average time.
Okay.
When it comes to investigating, because there are scenes that are held for days, and there are some scenes that are just held for hours. It all depends on what you have, what you know, what you don't know, and that kind of dictates the path that you take.
We get asked that frequently when family members will call for the aftermath of the cleanup and say, law enforcement's still there. And then they ask us, well, how long does this typically take? We don't know.
Right.
You know, it could take a couple hours. It could take several days.
Yeah.
So that's hard to answer, and it's hard for us to kind of stage and help them so they can kind of move back into their house. You know, is that something that you guys communicate with the families?
We do.
Like, you guys should find a hotel. We're going to be a while.
Well, yeah, we do, because, you know, the family is obviously a traumatic event. Anytime you have you know, a family member that was, you know, the victim of a crime. And we have victim advocates.
Yes.
Who communicate on part of the detectives and the department to the family, kind of let them know kind of each step of the way, what to kind of expect. And so, yeah, we do let them know that, hey, we're going to be processing. It might take a while, and with some understanding, because they want resolution. They want to know, you know, what happened, and they also want somebody to be held accountable for what occurred. So with them being informed on the steps that we're taking, they tend to be calm to an extent.
Maybe in shock a bit.
Always in shock.
Yeah.
But the part about communicating with each other, us communicating to them what we're doing, and and each step that we're taking along the way, there's an understanding.
Okay.
That, hey, in order for us to do what we need to do, this process is going to take a while.
Okay.
You know, or, hey, we have some information, we're going to be able to release this, you know, in 6 hours, you should be able to get back in. You know, hey, we're going to be on this for several days.
Okay.
Just so you know, but we're going to communicate with you every step of the way.
Okay.
As much as we can.
Sure.
You know, without releasing information that's pertinent to the
Now,
crime.
are the CSI folks and the victims advocates, are those people typically civilians? Or are they sworn in?
They're civilians.
They're all civilians.
Yeah. They're typically, at least with our agency, our crime scene technicians are civilians. And then our victim advocates are civilians as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, does that pose any type of issue that they're not sworn in individuals?
No, it doesn't pose an issue at all. Actually, it really helps us, because you're not talking about an individual who has several different hats to wear.
Gotcha.
You know, this crime scene tech, that's their hat. They know the lane that they stay in. They're not going in to interview people like you might see on TV. They're not doing all this, you know, this vast majority of the investigation where they're interviewing people and pulling evidence.
Sure.
And and responding to follow-ups based on that information. So they're
very focused. They're very one-dimensional.
Right. They're focusing on that scene.
Right.
And the victim advocates, they're focusing on helping the victims, the family members.
Okay.
So that in turn helps us because we can do what we need to do as far as the investigation is concerned, the interviews and so forth, and they can focus on the scene itself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, are victims advocates, are they providing resources that are given to them from the state, or is this kind of donations from private people or companies? How does that work?
The resources usually that they provide are stuff that we do from the department, from the agency.
Okay.
We're reaching out to them. We're providing information as far as resources that they can tap into. And some of those resources are just free. Mm-hmm. Some of those resources are not. But we try to help them out as much as we can.
Okay. Yeah. I've seen maybe a certain amount of money be able to go towards funeral expenses. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming then funeral homes have to agree to be a part of that system? Or?
Yeah, there's some indigent resources for families that don't have the funds.
Right.
And then, again, that's information that the advocates help them out and direct them to those resources.
Yeah, yes. They're very good at what they do, from what I see. Now, one last question on kind of evidentiary type stuff. Do you remember kind of what year or what time frame science was able to lift fingerprints out of blood? Because back in the day, it was all graphite dust, remember, on cars and burglaries. But then it progressed, and you're able to kind of use the amino black, the chemical blue, to pull that fingerprint out of liquid blood.
Right. I can't pinpoint a year.
But were you working as a detective when you were able to do that?
Oh yeah, I was a detective, and I've been on the agency, like I said, during this transformation in science. Right. So I've seen it occur. Yeah. And it's been very beneficial to us solving crimes and getting information that we need. There was at one point where you might go to a safe and property crime, and you really, really needed just to have the prints. But now with the advancement of DNA, just that touch DNA, we're able to solve a lot more cases, just even with property crimes. Now you can talk about crimes against persons, that solvability rate we talked about earlier, that really helps in that closure.
Would you agree that there's a big misconception on obtaining fingerprints on with graphite dust? People are under this illusion that it's super simple, and they don't realize that, a smudge or a partial is very difficult to kind of match through the APHIS system. It's not as easy as they make it look on TV.
The stuff you see on TV is sometimes
sensational.
It is sensational, and it is for to get viewers, engaged in the show. Yeah. So it's definitely a different process. Right. It definitely is tougher, and that's why crime scene, securing that scene as best as possible to not get it contaminated is really important for that first person on scene, being the patrol officers, to keep it intact for when detectives and the crime scene techs show up. Mm-hmm. But again, like I said before, they're trained and focused on what they do. And they do a really good job at it, and that helps us again.
That's fantastic. Right.
Yeah.
So I bet people get frustrated when they're like, well, just get the print. Like, they think it's just so simple, and they don't realize, well, I either have a partial or it's a good print, but it's smudged and I can't pull it, or, they get frustrated because they're associating everything with TV.
Right. And this is the funny part about that is that most of the time when you hear people really frustrated about prints, it's not really in a case with crimes against persons. it's a case with crimes against property.
Yes.
Because it's their vehicle that was just burglarized. Right. It was their home that was just burglarized.
Their lawnmower or something was stolen.
They're like, hey, there has to be prints on that window. They just went to my car. There has to be prints on the door handle. There's a little blood there.
Right.
They really think, okay, you got this. My crime is going to be solved just like that.
Yeah.
So it's usually property crimes, not crimes against persons that you hear the victim talking about. Hey, I've seen this before on TV. This should be done right here as well.
Right on. Well, when we were talking earlier, we were talking a little bit about some very sensational cases that you had during your time in homicide, and some of the cases, St. Pete is not exactly Los Angeles by any means, but these cases made national news because they were so extraordinary. And the first one that I kind of want to talk about is the decapitation. So can you kind of walk us through when you received the call, kind of how you received it, and then when you got there, kind of what you observed?
Yeah, I wasn't the lead detective on this on the decapitation, but I was one of the detectives that assisted with the interviews and the scene. And I just remember when we got the call, they were talking about homicide that just occurred, and it was a decapitation, and that the suspect was in custody. So we're thinking, wow,
Yeah.
And so we get to the scene, and you're just somewhat shocked yourself, and that when you got there, there's this decapitated individual, and the head of that individual is outside on a hood ornament, basically, of this vehicle.
So just the head was placed on the hood of a vehicle as an ornament.
Yes, yes. And
was the victim a male or female?
it was a male.
It was a male.
And you see this, at least for me, that's the first time I ever saw anything like that. So, and the only time actually in my career. And the suspect was still there, and just as calm as can be. And there was a scene where you had an outdoor scene and you had an indoor scene. So it was
so a big crime scene to contain.
A big crime scene to contain.
Okay. Do you remember who the caller was? Like why the guy stayed there, or did he just get caught quickly, or?
I don't remember that, who the caller was on that, but he got caught quickly because he stood by.
Okay.
He didn't try to run. He just actually sat there on the curb, and the officers who responded initially were able to take him into custody, and then we got there. I do remember that his former girlfriend was there. I interviewed her, and she provided some details as to what happened. And
can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah,
like how that happened?
Yeah. So basically, in that investigation, when I had the opportunity to speak with her, she described that this was a former boyfriend who she had children with, and that he would frequently come by and bang at the doors, bang on the windows, and this was a particular time she had her new boyfriend over, and she provided information stating that, hey, he's out there. I'm pretty sure it's him. He's banging, but he's going to leave. He's done this before, and he'll just walk off. This particular time, he didn't. He actually ended up breaking in, and
so he forced entry.
He forced entry into the home, and
was there any evidence to show that he knew the boyfriend was inside?
There was no evidence for us to say that he knew the boyfriend was inside. But once he did get inside, he did confront both of them, in a bedroom, and that's when he ended up attacking the new boyfriend with a machete and decapitated him. And
so he stabbed him several times first, or
just
kind of swinging?
Swing with the machete, and
waited till he was down, and then decapitated him? Or?
Yeah, when he was down, he decapitated him. Yeah.
Do you know or remember with the forensic evidence, was it a clean decapitation, or was this something that was almost like a sawing type activity?
No, because he used a machete, so it wouldn't have been a sawing. It was like more of a hacking, from what I recall, and
with a sharp blade or a dull blade?
No, from that
could have
machete,
been long and painful.
That machete was from what I recall, a rusted dull.
So this wasn't
machete.
Quick.
It wasn't quick. No, it was not quick. And so anyway, he ends up removing the head from the body, and he puts it outside on the car. And
so he was more focused on the boyfriend and taking the head out as an ornament. Never went for the girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend?
The information I got from her at the time was that she fled into a bathroom, and so he obviously did not go after her, because if he did, he probably would have been successful in, even if she was in the bathroom, forcing the door open and getting to her.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you first kind of saw this guy, when you got on scene, the suspect, the killer, was Dennis Roach, 34 years old, from Jamaica. From what I've read, could you tell that he was a bit mentally disturbed, or did he just seem like your average normal guy?
Well, I didn't have the privilege of or opportunity to speak to him.
Okay.
I do recall seeing him when I arrived on scene, but he wasn't. His mannerisms, his behavior didn't at the time indicate that there's just somebody with any kind of mental illness or anything like that. I was just under the impression that if this is the suspect, basically he went there for this mission to do what he did, and then after that, he just turned himself in.
But showed no remorse,
No,
no grief.
I mean, no, not there, not at the scene anyway. It was basically he's there, he's in custody, and
Was he covered in blood?
he had blood on the yeah, from what had just occurred. There was quite a bit of blood, yes.
Wow. Okay. So no remorse, no grief, kind of just quiet, just sitting there, not resisting arrest, not trying to flee, just was resigning himself to almost like this was planned.
Can't necessarily say it was planned. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But he definitely went over there with intent
Right.
to do what he did. And that could have been something in his mind, it's a new boyfriend's there. I'm going to get him right now. Maybe he went over there to make contact with her, then found that the new boyfriend was there, and then this is what he's going to do.
Wow.
But he definitely had intent on what he did. That was obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To show up with a machete.
Right.
Yeah. So the victim, Gregory Shannon, was only 18 years old.
Yes.
And this was in an apartment complex, right?
No, this was a house.
It was a single family home?
Yes.
Were there any other witnesses that literally saw this guy kind of walking out with a decapitated head and placing it on the car?
Yeah, there were, this was during the day. So this was not something that occurred in the middle of the night. So there were people out and about. And yeah, there were people that saw this.
Wow.
So there were witnesses to this. And but yeah, so it was really shocking for...
Oh yeah, that must be horrifying.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So what was the status of the ex-girlfriend and the children? Do you remember kind of where they were, what if they observed it, if the woman tried to defend the boyfriend?
The witness girlfriend, she did not, and when this occurred, it was obviously for her to, she was trying to protect herself.
Yeah.
And so she fled to the bathroom and tried to
lock herself in.
And obviously she didn't want to be a victim, but yeah, so she removed herself from the situation.
Okay, and then the children were also in the home?
From what I recall, yes.
Okay.
They were there, but I'm trying to think back on that one.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that must be extremely traumatic.
Right.
Okay, do you remember actually testifying in court when this actually went to court?
No, when this one, from what I recall, when this one came around, they ruled that he was not competent to take the stand
trial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he pleaded what, not guilty by insanity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That was probably a big relief because, a murder trial is daunting.
Oh yeah, it's a big process. It's a very big process, and depending on the how many people are involved and whether it's a guilty or not guilty plea, and obviously getting legal teams involved, that could be a long process.
Sure.
of over a course of several days.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you happen to remember what happened to the girlfriend? Was she helpful with this whole process, or was she just in a state of shock? How was that? Because she was a victim of domestic violence.
Yeah, when my recollection when I interviewed her, she was rather calm given the circumstances.
Yeah.
She did provide a great bit of detail from what she saw at the time, but she definitely was helpful and cooperative in the interview.
Wow.
Yeah.
So after I did a little bit of research on it, I noticed that 6 years later, after he was placed in this mental health institution, his charge of guilty of the first-degree murder, he was reversed and he was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 40. So I think he's still sitting there in life in prison. So I'm not sure how that happened, but that's a sad, sad case. That happened in 2002, right?
2002, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. So now I'd love to talk to you about another sensational case that was just all over the St. Pete, Tampa metro area, Oba Chandler. It was a little bit before your time, but I know that you were coming on board when the arrest was made, so you probably have some, some somewhat intimate knowledge, more than we would have off the papers. What do you remember about that, and can you tell everybody what he did?
Oh yeah, that was probably one of the biggest cases our agency has ever worked, because you're talking about a serial killer, and it's not something that you see every day.
Right.
And in our particular case, he was involved in the murder of mom and her two kids.
Wow. Okay. How did was that his first murder in the?
I'm not sure if that was
subsequent, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was his first one or not.
Okay.
But I know he was involved in several.
Okay.
And it was a great team effort, and those detectives that worked at the time, and homicide, and to come to a case closure on that. It took a lot of teamwork.
So let's talk. How did Oba Chandler meet his victim in this particular case, the mom and the two daughters, and what transpired to their death?
In this one, I want to say that they met. I can't remember if it was a hotel, restaurant, or something like that, and what I recall too, there was maybe went out on a boat, invited them out, and they were down on vacation. I want to say it was from Ohio.
Okay, so we have the mother, the two daughters on the boat with Oba Chandler. Do you kind of remember anything about what led up to their death, how he killed them, and what transpired afterwards?
Yeah, from what I recall on that one, he bound the victims after strangling them, and then he threw them overboard.
Wow. Okay. So, what a horrible way to die.
Yes.
All three sexually assaulted, asphyxiated, and then thrown overboard. Wow. Okay. So, how were their bodies found? Do you remember?
They were found floating.
Okay.
And it was on the St. Pete side, or Pinellas side. And so we had jurisdiction on that, and that's how our detectives became involved in that.
Okay. Do you remember, did they have any trouble identifying these ladies, because they weren't from the area?
Yeah, I mean, they, like any case, you have to really go back, and whether it's trying to get latent prints, dental records, to identify a person, and obviously these bodies were in the water.
Right.
So you have elements that you're dealing with, and slippage of the skin and so forth. So it makes it somewhat difficult.
Yeah.
But eventually they were able to get an identification of the people involved.
Okay. And then the autopsy kind of showed that they were sexually assaulted.
Right.
And
right. Yeah. The autopsy
strangled.
Came back and showed their manner in which they were murdered.
Okay. So I'm assuming at that point you guys had no idea who Oba Chandler was at that point.
No.
Okay.
No. Again, the detectives, once they started putting information out there about who the victims were, like anything else, you're able to backtrack. So you start inside, and you start to go outside, and so they're able to find out where they were from, and then that information, once they're able to find out who a potential suspect was, that's when they were able to determine that he was involved in other homicides as well.
Okay,
and that's collaboration with other agencies and so forth.
So somebody was able to tell you guys that this lady and her two daughters went on a boat ride with Oba Chandler. Somebody knew that at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how did you know, or how did they know at this point, that they had a serial killer on their hands? How did you not just think, okay, it's this lady and their two daughters and that's it?
That is collaboration and getting information out. When you're looking for any homicide, you put out information as far as when you're trying to identify the victim, known associates, where they may have been, family members, friends, like I said. And when they did that, they were able to identify a potential suspect, who in turn, they find out from other agencies may be involved in some other crimes as well.
Okay.
And that's how they tied into this person was a serial killer.
So the victim, Joan Rogers, the mother, 32 years old, one of her daughters 17 and the other one 14, were from Ohio, like you mentioned. So when they were on the boat, do you remember a little bit of kind of how their bodies were when they were found? Obviously they were in water for a great deal of time, but any any issues like that with the particular body that would have led to more evidence or clues?
Yeah, in this particular case, the bodies were weighed down, and they were naked from the waist down, but they were weighed down with concrete in an effort to try to,
Sink them.
Sink them, dispose of the bodies.
Right. Okay. So I also read somewhere that there was maybe some duct tape on their mouths, but not their eyes. Does that kind of indicate that maybe the sexual assaults were done obviously right there on the boat in front of one another?
Doesn't necessarily indicate that,
Yeah.
but there is some evidence to suggest, based in, and this is information that would come after the autopsy as well, and then going back and finding evidence from the actual crime scene. There's probably the reality that they did see, their family members assaulted and then thrown overboard.
Okay. Wow. Now, was that something that detectives can use that might be a pattern for a serial killer like Oba Chandler, that maybe he always duct tapes the mouth and not the eyes for a particular reason? Or
if you're able to link, one case with several others, and then you can say there's a pattern. There's a manner in which he committed his homicides, and you can tie those in as similarities. Just the single homicide alone, or in this particular case, just this one, no. But when you put them together, yes.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that detectives decided to put these clues and images of what they thought he looked like or who it was on billboards, and they were just flooded with tips. Is that something that you guys do frequently to involve the public?
Yeah. So obviously, this is a time when DNA evidence was not as what it is today,
right?
And science is not what it is today, and so having a forensic artist or sketch artist do an image of somebody and then putting that up creates a lot of communication to us, tips and so forth. So that helps us in identifying potential, and you get all kinds of leads that come in, and you have to follow up on each lead. You have to exclude each one, and if you can't exclude them, then that person remains a suspect until you can. So yeah, information coming in like that does help us out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's more eyes are better than one, right?
They are, and you're talking about then as opposed to now where you have social media. So now social media, you're able to put a lot of stuff out on computers and share it like that. As back then, no, you didn't have it like that.
Right.
The advancements weren't there.
Right.
Yeah.
You were a new officer during that time. Do you remember following this case pretty intently, or?
Yeah, I remember coming on, and it's actually right before I came on when all this stuff happened. But coming in as a new officer and hearing kind of what the detectives were doing, what they worked, and it just it's one of those things that sparks interest in you, and kind of shapes the career path that you want to take.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. So, do you remember the trial at all, or anything about it?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, so apparently he was arrested in 1992, but not convicted until 94, and I guess he was given the death penalty. So he was in his 40s when these murders happened, and then he was executed in November of 2011.
Wow.
So he sat on death row for quite a while.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Which is usually the case when people who are convicted and given the death penalty. It's going to be a while because of appeals. Right.
Yeah, lots of appeals.
Yeah.
We got to make sure we're right.
Right.
Yeah. So would you say that was one of the case, or maybe the case, that really shaped you into wanting to go to homicide?
It definitely was one of the cases that shaped me and directed me in the path that I wanted to take. But I think throughout the course of my career, especially early on, it was the idea of helping people, and because homicide is just such a traumatic event, and for the family, and so it's one of those things that you want to help people get closure.
Sure.
And if you can be a part of that, so that's one of the things that really got me going in that direction.
Get you motivated to do that, right? To help these people get closure. On that same kind of realm here, to kind of get closure, back when you were in homicide, did you have any resources to help these people, point them in the right direction to do any type of cleanup. Like the decapitation was probably an extremely bloody scene that was left for that lady. What were the resources back then?
You know, it's funny that you asked that, because as a young officer and even as a young detective, I often thought like, wow, you know, who's going to clean this up? Because it wasn't us.
Right.
And you were just told basically it was the responsibility of the family.
Exactly.
And you think, wow, you know, how can, you know, these scenes be left with the responsibility of the family
Right.
to clean these scenes up?
It's horrifying.
It's
Yeah.
horrifying, right? And so yeah, that was shocking to me, and because I really thought at the time that we would have somebody that would do that, but we didn't.
Right.
You know, that's not an area that we provide resources
Right.
on. You know, yeah.
It's surprising.
Yeah.
I believe, especially in a case where you might have a suicide in the home that's shared with other family members.
Right.
It's not like you can avoid it.
Right.
Or just close the door, or
Right.
you know, something like that. Do you remember kind of at what point in your career the cleanup side of things started to be more of a private business that would help people?
Can't really pinpoint a time in my career, but I do know when I mentioned before about the victims advocates being a resource. As an agency, what we try to always do is make sure that we have as much information as possible to help a family.
Sure.
And then those advocates reaching out and pointing them in the right direction
Right.
as to what resources are out there for them to get something done.
Sure.
Because we don't expect them to go in and take care of a scene. But I know they expect us to provide them with
Exactly.
information or direction in which to go so that can be done for them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So we were talking a lot about DNA, and coincidentally, after Oba Chandler was executed, they found his DNA from another murder in 2014 in South Florida. So DNA has been a game changer, I'm assuming, for police departments and you know, solving all these crimes. You know, how would you say, how many unsolved, serious, violent crimes just sit on the shelf for years and years? Is that a good portion of them?
Oh, wow. There's quite a bit of unsolved crimes. And I know in St. Pete, for instance, it got to a point where there are so many that we decided to have a cold case unit. And so we had our homicide unit, but you also had some detectives that focused strictly on those unsolved cases. And if you were to go on to St. Pete website today, you can look up unsolved murders on there. And there, you know, there were some that I had back in the day, and that were still, you know, unsolved. So
now, if one of those homicides would have happened, say in the 80s, pre-DNA, do you have enough evidence from the 80s that you can bring into today and say, let's run this?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So it's maintained.
It's maintained,
Okay.
right? You know, there's no statute of limitations on the homicide, so
Right.
you know that information.
What about a rape, though?
You know, yes it is. But with a homicide, no. And so they will maintain that information and the evidence that they have, and hopefully, you know, they're able to get a hit. And then hopefully the investigation on the front end was good, because all that ties into everything on the back end. And but it still takes, even if you get a hit, you have to go back and look at that case where what information they had from before, what investigation was done before, and you have to do it all over again.
Right.
Just to, you know, tie that DNA in with that suspect, and to have a solid case when it's time to present it in court.
Is that frustrating for cold case detectives to have really a resilience and patience to be able to go through something that's 20, 30 years old with, you know, a very small percentage of a chance of being able to solve it, to really hit it over and over again? Maybe even some of your witnesses and victims aren't even alive anymore.
Right. So it's really tough for those cold case detectives, because yes, they do have to be patient. And you mentioned about some of the victims, some of the witnesses might not be alive anymore. Very, very true. Or they could still be alive, but they could be so old at that point that, you know, their recollection on what occurred and their statements could change altogether.
Yeah.
So it's trying to piece that back. You might have the DNA, but you still have to piece that puzzle together.
Right.
And to figure out what occurred then with what you have now, and to lead to a solid conviction.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Let's segue into, you mentioned when you started out, you had a stint in community policing.
Yes.
For people that don't know what that is, can you kind of describe what your role was with the department and how you worked with the community?
Sure. Community policing basically is you are assigned to a community as an officer. It might be a team of officers, but you're a problem solver. So you're basically solving crime through trying to put together, and we used to use this method called SARA, which is called the acronym for Scanning, Analysis, Response, and Assessment. And so anyway, you basically get out there, and it depends on what it is. I mean, you could have a drug problem in your neighborhood, and you're the community officer, so you're going to put together all the resources. You're going to be the person that's going to collaborate with patrol. You're going to collaborate with vice and narcotics detectives. You're going to collaborate with the crime watch or the neighborhood watch, and put that all together and to figure out what the problem is and how you're going to respond to it, and then get some closure. It could be something where you have a dilapidated home,
Sure.
and you have transients sleeping in the home.
Yeah.
It could be a animal complaint. It just all depends. Whatever the issue is in that community, could be speeding, and you need to meet with traffic and engineering. See if you could put speed humps or something in the street,
Sure.
just to get traffic slowed down. But whatever the issue is that those community members have, you're their resource with the department. You're their liaison to try to get that problem solved.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're assigned then to particular neighborhoods.
Right.
And would it be fair to say that there is enough officers to represent all of the city and all the neighborhoods, or are we focusing on lower income?
No, it's for the whole city. It doesn't matter if you're in the pink streets of St. Pete or in more of an inner city neighborhood.
Sure.
But the whole city is covered.
Okay.
And community policing has changed over the course of the years, where we've was a big focus at one point, in the 90s, 2000s, and then we kind of did away with it and had team policing. We kind of used that concept, but then kind of got back into community policing because people want to have that resource. They want to have that officer or at least that division of people that they can reach out to and say, hey, I'm having this issue in my neighborhood. Can you help me out?
Yeah.
Because not everything is a 911 call.
Sure. Some things are just nuisances, or they really want to see you and get to know you, and then you get to know them.
Right. And that's what we really try to do back then, is just be as visible as possible.
Right.
Because they want to see you. They
Sure.
want to see you in a neighborhood. Whether you're riding a bike, you're on a golf cart, you're walking. They want to see you to know that, hey, this is my officer, and I can reach out to them for anything.
Sure.
And you have personal relationships with, quite a few people in your community, and that really helped too, because when you have things like, we talked a lot about today with homicides or robberies or burglaries, you were able to identify a lot of people in the neighborhood just out of your contacts. So you could go, a detective might come to you as a community police officer, hey, do you know this guy? Show you, oh yeah, I know him, that's so-and-so, or they hang out with this person.
Right.
And so you become a resource for the detectives as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds very rewarding.
Yeah. And it helps you in your career path. So if you're trying to get someplace else, you do a good job there, you can go someplace else.
Absolutely.
Because, having people that provide you with information.
Absolutely.
Whether it's, confidential informants or people just associates in the community that just want to come to you and provide stuff. That's really
perfect.
Good.
Sounds like a win-win.
It is a win-win.
Yeah.
It really is. Again, thanks for having me here today. And, I got into law enforcement because I wanted to help people. My dad was in law enforcement. He did, you know, just like I did 27
Wow.
years in Virginia. And so I kind of followed his path and with the idea of helping people in the community. And you guys, I want to say thank you for what you do, because it's a tough job. It really is a tough job. And people don't know, you know, they don't know, or they don't really realize the stuff that you do to get them back to being whole. You know, we just do the investigation.
Yeah.
We try to give them closure from that end and help them. But you, for what you do, you get them back to normal.
Yeah.
You know, you get that home back to normal.
Right.
You get them back to what they had before, and it's traumatic. It's very traumatic, the events that they go through. And for us, quite often it's, okay, we're done, and we're going to get back to you. But then they're left with, man, you know, what about my home? You know, I mean, who's going to help me here? Who's going to restore this, or who's going to, you know, clean this up to make it look like it did before?
Yeah.
And you guys go in and I want to say thank you. I mean,
Yeah.
because you do a great job at that.
Yeah.
And you know,
Thank you
it's
so much
kudos,
for
yeah.
saying so. I mean, you know, being former law enforcement myself, there was definitely a void there, you know, and I always thought, God, it's terrible to leave a homicide and say, you're on your own, you know, and have no responsibility or obligation to do that. So, you know, I think working together, whether, you know, we're private, you're public or whatever, working together, we meet that common goal. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. These are extraordinary. And I think we've all learned a lot from your experiences, and I really appreciate you being here.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching Talking Decon, guys. Till next time.